Welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Rob Staton. He is a BBC Yorkshire sports journalist. He can tell you more about his work there, but I found him because he runs the Seahawks draft blog website. And there he's written some of the most in-depth analysis of Seahawks draft picks that I've ever seen. He's really good at breaking down the players that they drafted using this formula to predict who they will take in the next draft. So we'll talk about who the Seahawks could take, who he likes, who he thinks is overrated, and he'll also explain how he became a Seahawks fan since he lives in England. I had a blast doing this interview. I could talk Seahawks and the draft for hours, and I think if you like football, especially the Seahawks, I think you're going to enjoy this one too. You ready to do this?
Yeah, all good to go, man.
Okay, cool. All right, well, welcome Rob Staton to my podcast here. You are a journalist for the BBC Yorkshire Sports. Is that correct?
Yeah, BBC Yorkshire, yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about what you do there, because I don't know a lot about your work there. I mean, obviously I know your work on Seahawks Draft Blogger, but I don't know your work for the BBC.
So I'm a sports journalist and I'm a host for probably about 10 years on a popular football, so soccer, football phone-in over here, and then I've switched over to sort of the TV side of things now, and I'm a sports journalist, but because of obviously the world, there's not a lot of sport going on at the moment with the pandemic, so I've kind of switched to being a news journalist at the moment, but hopefully the sport will get back to normal soon.
Yeah, well, obviously you didn't grow up in Seattle. You're a sports journalist, and then so when did you get interested in American football, and why the Seahawks of all teams? Because I don't think they played in England for a while.
No. I used to live in Vancouver, so
you did?
I used to live in Vancouver, and then I've been to Seattle a few times, and then we went to a game, and just like any other person going to a game for the first time, just became obsessed with the team. Really enjoyed that first experience. Came back to follow the team here. And I've followed them ever since. And that was 15 years ago. 15
years. So do you remember the game? Which one it was? I had season tickets back in the early. Well, when it was called Quest Field.
Yeah. So it was a Monday night football game. It was, let me think. So it was 14 years ago. So it was the snow game against Green Bay. Brett Favre, if you remember that one. Seahawks won the game. It was quite an entertaining game. Snowed very heavily. The story around the game is that I kind of got tickets. We bought them from I think it was like Razorgate or something like that to go to the game.
Sure.
And so my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we went to the game and we got to the stadium and we were looking for row SR. I mean, we couldn't find it. We went all the way to the back of Quest Field, as it was known at the time. Couldn't find the seats anywhere. And we were asking the people there, the helpers, like, where's row SR? And they were saying, I've never heard of a row SR. But we got into the stadium, so there must be a row SR because the tickets worked. We hadn't been given some dodgy. So anyway, eventually we found somebody who knew what row SR meant, and it was standing room only. So my girlfriend, now wife at the time, who had no interest in American football, I had to break the news to her that we had to stand on a number in the snow for 4 hours, and I loved every second of it. And she was not as keen, but I was hooked ever since then. Follow the team and try and get back to Seattle as often as possible.
That is awesome. So do you feel like American football or soccer is more exciting, and why?
Well, I think they're both. I don't really want to say one's better than the other. When I was, I thought that soccer was the best sport in the world. I mean, it was just there's no stops. You don't have a series of plays and then a set of ad breaks in the middle of a soccer game. But at the same time, the thing about American football is it's maybe a little bit more physical. You have sort of amazing things happen on a play-to-play basis, which you can, and the statistical side of things is so much better. I mean, in soccer, all you have is goals and assists, and clean sheets. So who's not conceding the goals, who's scoring the goals. Whereas in American football, I just love the the way that you can dig into the numbers and stuff like that. And it is a real mix between the physicality and the tactical side of things. Whereas in soccer, it really is. I think it's probably more skill orientated. So, but nothing is better than I wouldn't want to separate the two things. I mean, watching England at a World Cup is the most exciting thing in the world. When England beat Colombia on penalties at the last World Cup a couple of years ago, it was an amazing experience. Watching England get to the semi-finals.
Yeah.
But likewise, watching the Seahawks win a Super Bowl was really special as well. So I like both sports.
So for you, it's like it's comparable then. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I just cannot get into. And Seattle even has a soccer team. I don't know if you follow the Sounders at all, but I just can't get into it. I don't know. I have to. I give it another shot. I'll try anything, but
it's. I think it's like a lot of things. I kind of watch any sport, so I'm a huge cricket fan. We love cricket over here.
That's kind of like baseball. It's England baseball, right? Like their version of it. Yeah. Yeah,
it's a little bit. I'd say it's probably a little bit more refined. That's no disrespect to anybody who likes baseball. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different aspects of cricket, whereas in baseball it is what it is sort of thing. But we play Australia every 4 years in a thing called the Ashes, and that is really popular over here. We love to beat Australia, they love to beat us. And then there's the rugby side of things as well. I can watch all of those sports, love American football. I lived in Vancouver, so I have to show a little bit of interest in ice hockey. And, I went to watch the Sonics play in Seattle as well.
Oh, cool.
Before they obviously disappeared to Oklahoma City. So, I'm kind of a bit of a geek when it comes to sports. I can pretty much watch anything.
That's cool. So what made you decide to start the Seahawks blog page? It was about 12 years ago, right?
Yeah, so what it was a New Year's Eve, funnily enough. I was kind of finding something to do. When I say it was New Year's Eve, it wasn't like 10 to 12 or anything like that. The clock was not. It wasn't counting down to midnight. It was some time like lunchtime or something, and I was just killing time. I was at home, and the Seahawks. So I started it during the 2008 season. And kind of what it was the Seahawks were going to end up finishing 4-12.
Right.
Twitter was not a thing back then. Really, if you wanted to stay connected to the Seahawks, you had Mike Sando's blog on the Tacoma News Tribune, and that was it. And blogs were kind of a thing. They were quite a popular thing at the time.
Right.
And I just thought, wouldn't it be really good to have a one-stop shop website where you could go and all of the information that you wanted on because the Seahawks there was nothing to look forward to. They were winning 4 games that year.
Yeah.
But the draft was the one thing that people could focus on and a distraction. So let's put something here. And it started out was a series of links to various mock drafts. This guy thinks the Seahawks. Mel Kiper thinks they will draft this guy. Todd McShay said this today. This report's come out about this guy. I had a guy called Kyle who knew a lot more about the prospects than I did, who was writing about it when it first started out. And then gradually over time, it just kind of expanded, and then upgraded the website, and then became more and more involved. Actually watching the players and scout them and give my own opinion on them. And 12 years later, it's still going strong. So
wow.
It's been a big part of my life. It's been like my second full-time job for the last 12 years. So.
Yeah, I think you are the expert in the field, in my opinion, of all I love the draft. I love the Seahawks. I always go to your page if I want to know, what I think the Seahawks are going to do. That being said, you're kind of an insider. You're definitely more of an insider than me. You've interviewed players, media people, management. What is your thought about the upcoming NFL season? Do you think that it's going to happen? I think, in my opinion, there's 3 scenarios. One is it starts on time with full crowds, everything's normal. 2, it's either going to be late or have reduced or no crowds. And then the third option is the whole season's canceled. Which one of those 3 do you think will happen?
I think that financially there probably will be a season. I think financially it will probably be too costly to not have any season. But then, of course, you've got to be safe. And, I have to say I'm not up to date completely with the situation in the States right now with the coronavirus. I know over here they're talking about starting the soccer season again, probably in around July time, and having the players, play behind closed doors, which means no fans. And I think that's kind of the widely established what is going to happen is we're going to see there's a lot of sports in this country that are gearing up to start again soon. And we are seeing in other countries that the sports are starting to to start again, but it's not going to be with fans. So if I was going to put any kind of money on it right now, I'd probably say that there will be an NFL season, but there won't be any fans in the stadium.
So you don't think they could do like social distancing and just have 6 feet between all the fans? Because those stadiums are huge.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. So I think you just have to be so careful with this thing. The problem the NFL's got is that, if it's the NBA, you can play in an arena which is empty. You can test 10 players and you can go and play a game of basketball. With the NFL, you have these like entourage of staff and coaches and equipment guys and doctors, and then you've got a 53-man roster that has to travel, and
right.
it's just a lot more people already right off the bat, which will make it a difficult proposition. But the NFL's got enough money to test all of the players, to isolate the players who have got the disease. I just think it's the fan side of things, and again, I'm not completely up to date with where you guys are with the virus. There's a feeling in England that the peak's going to come pretty soon. And that they might, within the next sort of 3 weeks, start to ease some of the lockdown measures that we have in this country. And if that is the same with the States, then, the NFL season scheduled to start in September. That's quite considerable time away. They could probably delay it another month if they needed that.
Yeah.
And then they could potentially play without fans. I think probably what they would do is maybe pipe in some crowd noise in some way so that home teams can still have that little bit of an advantage there.
I wonder if they would be the same. Yeah, I wonder if they would give teams additional players, because what if somebody on the team did get the coronavirus, then they could infect all the other team members. Wouldn't you need you need to quarantine some people that may have it, even if they have no symptoms? So then you'd have to bring up some other players. I mean, I know they have the practice squad, but that's not very. And you think they might expand the practice squad or something?
Yeah, I think they probably will be allowed. I suspect there'll be some kind of measure, like an extra injured reserve spot or something like that.
Something.
So that anybody who is diagnosed with the disease will then have to go and isolate and be away from the team for at least a couple of weeks. And therefore you will be able to call somebody else up, I would imagine, in a standard way. And then when that player is ready to return and part of the group again, then it's as if they're returning from injured reserve. I think that's probably what they will do.
Yeah. Well, I know there's going to be a draft, and for me, growing up as a Seahawks fan, kind of like you said, that 2008 4-12 season, they were often pretty bad. So I'd often read in the newspaper, next year is going to be the year, and that would always get me excited about the draft and the new players. And then I just fell in love with the draft process itself and just seeing where all these players go. And then, I mean, if you look back and, Tom Brady, every team passed on Tom Brady multiple times, and it's so exciting to see where these guys are going to go. What else do you love specifically about the draft? Because you could have done your blog just about the Seahawks, but you specifically chose the draft portion, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that I like about it is that every single fan in the NFL has a reason to tune in and have something to react to. I mean, it's very unique in that, when free agency starts, you have a handful of teams who are very, very busy, who will go and spend the money and sign the big names, and then you have a whole host of teams who don't do anything. They're inactive almost every single year.
Yeah.
Whereas when the draft comes around, every team is going to draft somebody at some stage. There's going to be something interesting. There's a reason to watch. It's great entertainment to see where, especially for me, like having spent months and months and months. I mean, like some of these guys have been watching even last year because they could have declared a year ago and then they returned for a senior season or another season in college football. You've watched these guys for like 2 or 3 years, and then you get to see where they end up in the NFL and how they fit and, follow their stories. And there's all the drama of it, teams and the surprise moves that you don't expect. There's always something. There's always a headline of some description. It never goes according to plan. Like this draft, for example, who the hell knows where Tua Tagovailoa is going to go?
Right.
He could be a top 10 pick. He could slip out of the first round because of this hip injury. I mean, like nobody knows. And you sort of look at the media, and even they don't know. You've got some guys put him in the top 5, and some guys put him, falling, and then some guys put him in the teams and say, but he could fall or he could go. Nobody's got an idea. So we get to find out, all these things that you talk about for months and months. Where's this guy going to go? Would they draft him? Would they draft him? And then you get answers, and then you get to analyze it. So I think it's a really unique thing and a great event. And it's always fun to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah. So what goes into analyzing the draft picks for you? Because clearly you do your homework with the workouts and the tape and the measurables and all that thing. But what about the mental thing? Because I think that's such a big piece. You look at a lot of the best draft picks, even guys that we've had on the Seahawks who are overlooked because they didn't have the right physical measurables, but they got the work ethic and the determination, like Richard Sherman, Russell Wilson. Like, how do you analyze that stuff? Do you listen to a lot of the interviews? Because players kind of always say the same thing. They always say they want to win. Winning is everything, blah, 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 blah. But like, how do you do you ever take that into account when you're analyzing prospects? Like this guy's got the it factor or the determination.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things you can do is like you said, watch the interviews, and there are a lot of generic interviews out there, but you can get a feel for certain players. I mean, one that I remember distinctly was DeAndre Hopkins when he was at Clemson.
Yeah.
So in 2013, and he lasted into the 20s. But when you watched his interviews, and he would sit down and I think they played LSU in a bowl game. I think they beat LSU in his final game, which was a bowl game for Clemson. And someone asked him, how did you do this and how did you beat this guy in coverage? And he just broke down the defense was doing, what his role was, the route concept and everything like that. And, I wrote an article saying what a great, I just, everything about him is great. And the fact that he can give an answer like that reveals a lot about him, that he understood football, that he had a high football IQ, and that he would probably adjust to the league a little bit quicker than some others because he had that sort of capacity to break down that. And look, all of Clemson's receivers are well coached, but he seemed especially knowledgeable in what the scheme was and what the defense was doing. So you can pick up little things like that. It's about finding the sources. I think it's about identifying the people to listen to. So Tony Pauline is somebody who I know very well, and he's a great guy, but he's a fantastic insider. And he doesn't just do this 3 weeks before the draft starts like a lot of the media do. Mm-hmm. He's doing this 12 months of the year, and he will just produce information constantly throughout the year about who are the high character guys, who are the guys that teams have concerns about. Just reports and info throughout the college season, throughout the summer, and you can just pick things up and you can learn stuff from people like that. And then the other thing is just sort of it's finding out those backstories. Who has overcome it, and like people, I think sometimes mistake simple things like, I don't know, a personal tragedy or something like that as showing grit. That's not always what grit is. That can be grit, but things happening to you in life that are not good is not grit alone.
It's how you react to it, right? I mean, just like, if you're a quarterback and you're going to get hassled by the media, you're going to lose, you're going to have bad games. How do you like Ryan Leaf, classic example. As soon as he started losing, I mean, it was just downhill. Like, he never crawled back from that. So it's like how you handle the adversity, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about, say, having that determination and that will to say, I've got all these odds stacked against me and I'm going to make it happen. And two of the players that I've interviewed this draft season, one of them was Robert Hunt. And, people go and check out his Twitter timeline or go and check out NFL.com. They've put together an amazing video of the adversity that he had. There was a hurricane where he lived. He lived in a trailer which was destroyed. He then, he had his dad had to raise $30 to go to a football camp or something, and he could only raise $22. But he went along with the $22 anyway, and they let him play. And all the other guys were in cleats and pads, and he had a t-shirt and shorts on, and he managed to get a scholarship to Louisiana Lafayette. When I interviewed him, he was playing on a high school team with 12 players, and he had to play offense and defense. When he was talking about when he got the scholarship offer for Louisiana Lafayette, he broke down in tears on the NFL.com video because he was like getting emotional just thinking of how hard he'd worked to get to that point. And he wasn't crying because he'd made it to Alabama or LSU or anything like that. Yeah. He was crying because he made it to Lafayette. And and when I see that, and then I watch the tape and I see this huge right tackle beating everybody up and fantastic in the run game and is just an exceptional player. That's grit.
Wow.
That's and it's like that. You can say that is when they talk about grit and the kind of player that the Seahawks love. That's who it is. It's a guy like that.
That's amazing. So, that's going to
go and try and find those stories.
And how do you learn how to, besides the mental piece, that's amazing listening to that story, way you tell that, but how do you learn to analyze all the draft picks and the numbers for the Seahawks? Because is this something you just figured out? Because I've never seen that. I've watched Mel Kiper, I watch all those draft experts, Mike Mayock, all those guys, but they never break down. You break down these measurables. I don't know how you figure this stuff out. And you're like, the Seahawks never draft people with arms under 33 inches long or whatever the cutoff is. Like, how did you figure all that stuff out? Because I've never seen anyone else do that. Is that just a numbers analysis that you just kind of like randomly kind of just looked at all the draft picks and figured it out, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing particularly special on my behalf. It's just sort of, if you go back and like, who have they drafted at cornerback? They've never, 3 or 4 years in with go, they've never drafted a cornerback with arms shorter than 32 inches. And you could see that was a trend. And then when a trend like that continues and it lasts a decade, then you can pretty much say with some confidence that they're probably not going to go down that road. And then it's picking up little trends. Like, they've targeted specifically explosive offensive linemen quite consistently over the last 10 years. Not everybody fits that, but most of the picks that they have fit that. So when you see a trend like that, you bring it up, and then when it keeps going and it keeps going, it makes you look smart. But really, all you're doing is you're saying this is what they've done in the past. The linebackers, they've looked for very specific things at different positions. And, we're very lucky in Seattle that there's been, a regime worth keeping around for a decade to enable us to have that information.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a Jets fan and you've had 3 GMs in the last 5 years, how can you pick up on any trends of GM when you're changing the GM every couple of years?
That's a good point.
So, and there's a lot of teams like that.
Definitely, yeah. No, but that's really cool that I've just never, because I've been reading articles about the Seahawks in the draft, back when there were still newspapers. And I remember even when I was a little kid, I've never seen anybody analyze the picks like that. It's very cool. So going back to kind of like the coronavirus and stuff, how now that's affecting the season, with the NFL draft presentation, like, how do you think the teleconference style of the draft is going to be this year? Do you think there's going to be less energy, and you think it'll be less entertaining to watch because of that? Because one of the most amazing things about the draft to me is the crowd and everything. Last year, we actually went to the Nashville draft. It was amazing. The energy was just awesome. So do you think that's going to change the energy of the show?
Oh, without a doubt. And, I love the crowd. I love seeing that crowd. It looked like an amazing experience in Tennessee. I'm sure you had a great time.
Oh, it was amazing.
Just watching it on TV.
Yeah.
It looked great. And
we're supposed to go to Vegas this year, but canceled.
Well, I remember I think it was in Philadelphia the year before, and that one looked great too.
Yeah.
And it's definitely going to suffer for that. I was kind of hoping, there was at some point I had this sort of real mental image of it just sort of being a clock on the screen.
Yeah.
And it was just ticking down. And then when it got to 0, Roger Goodell would just appear and go with the number 1 overall pick, and then it would just be that, because I can live without the rest of the stuff that comes with these things. The analysis in between picks, the talking heads. There's some for 3 or 4 months, all you have is people like Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, and then these TV broadcasters feel like they've got to bring in someone like Steve Young, completely out of the blue, just to have a big name, recognizable pundit in there. But he's not studied the draft in a way that Mel has, or Todd has, or somebody like that.
Right.
So I can live without the presentation side of it. I was really, really pining for just sort of a real basic production. But it seems the NFL Network has teamed up with ESPN, and we're going to have, they're going to go all guns blazing for this broadcast to make it as interesting as possible, with people essentially jumping in from home all over the place. So as long as they don't tip the picks, that's fine.
Yeah, I do like seeing the footage of the players. That's always nice. I mean, I've looked at a lot of it already, but it's nice to see it again. And then, yeah, sometimes if they do have the draft expert, like when they had Mayock back at NFL Network, he would break down the footage, which you've seen him do a million times too, but it's so cool to see that.
Mayock was just on a different level.
He was.
Wow. You know what? I mean, he was just Mr. Draft.
Right. Yeah.
Really entertaining guy.
So what do you think also with the coronavirus, not only changed the presentation of the draft, but just how the teams are drafting? Because every year there's all these hidden gems. We see the Mel Kiper drafts and the Mayock draft boards, and there's always all these guys that totally fall because of medical issues and also totally rise that none of the draft experts, quote unquote, knew about. So how do you think that'll change things now? Because there won't be as much inside information, right?
Yeah, there's a whole host of players that we don't have any information about. They either weren't invited to the combine, or when they got to the combine, they didn't do any of the tests because they thought they would just have a pro day in a few weeks, and then obviously the world's been changed, and they've not had a chance to do that. Usually you have, I'd probably say, a list of about 30 or 40 players who have really excelled at pro days that weren't on anybody's radar, maybe smaller school guys, and you can list all these guys, and we don't have any of those names now. So, how a team's going to judge this? It's and also that the medical side of things, there are going to be certain players who have issues flagged up, but the teams are not going to be able to bring them into their facility and have their doctor have a look at them. So you might find boards even smaller than in previous years. We could see a series of big names falling a lot further than anybody's expecting, purely because teams go, well, we have this guy here who we know we've given a pass and a clean bill of health to, but the player could go either way with his health. So which player are you going to draft? And that could just be a trend that goes on and on and on, because I'll tell you what teams don't want to do. They don't want to draft somebody, get that guy in for a medical in the days after the draft, and then him fail his medical. Right. Because then what do you do? Because you can't cut the player. Let's say you drafted someone at 17 and then he failed his medical. You're not going to cut that guy. You're presumably going to sign him. So you're going to sign a player that you otherwise wouldn't sign or draft.
Wow.
But you can't cut them, otherwise you look like a laughing stock in front of your fan base. And what's the owner going to say? Like, what are you doing? You just wasted a first-round pick.
Well, so if they fail the medical, though, couldn't it also just be that they maybe couldn't play that year? It's not like we're going to have career-ending injuries. A lot of these things they can bounce back from, right?
Well, some of the medicals, it will be things like with Miles Jack. It won't necessarily be that they can't play immediately. It might be that they might only last 3 or 4 years, and it's if you have a degenerative knee injury, which with a lot of guys who fall have these knee issues that people anticipate could be a problem down the line, or like heart conditions. Like these are very serious things. Like Montez Sweat he fell to like 25 last year because of a heart problem, and teams would have struck him off the board, but you might draft a guy with a heart problem that's not been detected, and you might not be able to play him. And then what do? You sign a guy who might, I'm sorry to put it as brutally as this, might die on the field if he's got a heart problem. Yeah. And then if you've signed him knowing that, then you're responsible for that.
Yikes.
So it becomes a real minefield. And what I think might happen, I don't know. None of us really know what's going to happen in this draft.
Right.
But I could see a situation where teams just focus on the guys they know about in terms of their health, and you see much less risk taken in this draft. And that's one of the reasons why everybody still thinks Tua's going to go early. I don't know how you can draft him early.
Yeah, that one seems like a gamble. And then I also heard he had a very low Wonderlic, which is kind of like the IQ test. He had like a 13. I think he retook and got a 19, but it's still a little sketchy that he scored a 13 and I think 20's average. 13 was not good. I know that.
Yeah, he's a hard player to judge overall. I mean, like on the tape as well, you could pick flaws with him, and all of his interceptions were the same. He throws interceptions in the same way that Ryan Tannehill threw interceptions at Texas A&M, which is he kind of throws blind. He doesn't see safeties, hiding in the long grass. That and yes, there's a lot of talent there, but he also had. There's Jerry Jeudy, there's Henry Ruggs, there's Waddle, there's Smith, Devonta Smith, who's probably going to go very early as well next year. A top class offensive line, a great running back. He couldn't have wished for anything more, really. Right. And he kept getting hurt, for me, I would not want to say that's our guy.
Right, I know.
For future,
that's franchise. What I'm saying with my friend, I'm like, I'm so glad we have Russell Wilson because I mean, other than, unless you could get Joe Burrow, but I'm glad we have Russell Wilson because I wouldn't want to take the gamble on Tua. But what do you think about the cyber pro days? Like, are you a believer in those? Like, I think they said Grant Delpit ran like a 4-point, whatever it was, like ridiculous 40 time on a cyber pro day. Are you a believer in those, or do you think those are kind of like
no?
Okay.
So what you can do with those things is you can. I mean, everybody ran well on those. There wasn't a single guy who ran. If Grant Delpit was capable of a 4.3, he'd have run at the combine. It's outdoors, so it's probably heavily wind assisted for a start. In the combine, it's indoors, so there's no wind. So that alone can shave a considerable amount of time off. And then you have things like a fast track and stuff like that. And it always raises a flag to me when a player is healthy and doesn't run at the combine, then runs particularly well at his pro day, because that to me says he's slow and he knows that he's going to run faster at his pro day. And and there was a lot of guys who, there's a few guys that have been mocked. Like Yeeta Gross Matos didn't run at the combine. He didn't do any of the agility testing at the combine, but he did every single drill, every positional drill. He did the vertical jump, he did the broad jump, he did the bench. He was healthy. He just chose not to run. Why was that? What have you got to hide? If I was in a room somewhere as a GM or a scout, I'd be saying, why didn't that guy run? He clearly isn't very fast. And that's a flag for me. He was hoping that he could get to his pro day and run a lot faster time.
Interesting. Well, let's dive into the prospects then this year. We'll just go through position. So we talked about quarterbacks with Tua, but who are your other favorite QBs? Is there any QBs that you like for the Seahawks? Obviously not as a starter, but maybe as a backup.
Not really. I mean, Jalen Hurts, when he was sort of later rounds, was somebody, but he's flying up the board and he's going to probably go round 2 now. I think that Steven Montez is a guy who I think has got some potential as a possible like priority free agent or somebody like that. I could see him maybe even being like a 7th round target. He's got all the talent in the world, but just wasn't ever consistent enough at Colorado. And the only other quarterback is Jake Luton at Oregon State. I thought that he's got something about him. Again, you're talking late around priority free agent type level. But it zips out of his hand, and he wasn't in the best of Oregon State. He is somebody who I think could potentially work his way into like being a backup, something like that.
What about Anthony Gordon from Washington? I'm a big Washington State fan, so do you think he has a chance to be a backup, maybe the Seahawks?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, he had a Senior Bowl. He looked the ball at the combine as well. And the one thing that I read about, I can't remember where I read this, so I can't give credit to who mentioned it or who noticed it, but apparently he was in the ear of Darrell Bell, funnily enough, who is the Lions' offensive coordinator, after every single, portion of practice. What did I need to do here? What did it look for? Trying to pick up advice, and he was like really like a bookworm. He was sort of really in the pocket of Darrell Bevel, just trying to find out all of the information that he could. So,
that's good.
So yeah, I like Gordon. I don't think any of these guys. The problem is to be a quarterback in the NFL, you have to be amazing.
Yeah,
and a lot of these guys are just decent.
Yeah, what do you?
There's a backup. Yeah.
Yeah. What about? I had Trevor Sycamore. He does a draft podcast, and I asked him for who he thought was overrated. He said he thinks Jordan Love is a little bit overrated. Do you agree with that? He's a quarterback.
I'm not a
Utah State.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Jordan Love fan. I mean, I think that what he does well is he does the same thing that Patrick Mahomes does well, which is he can take off and on the run flick his wrist and it looks downfield. And anybody who's trying to find a Mahomes type, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that he is Patrick Mahomes, but who can do a little bit of the stuff that you move around, you make the improbable happen. He can do that. The only problem is that he's a lot more erratic than Mahomes was. Mahomes just had this gunslinger, Brett Favre style of play when he was that you just love to watch. Whereas Jordan Love some of his interceptions are abysmal. Like he throw back shoulder and not see the cornerback. He throws the same interception over and over and over again. And people say, well, he played at Utah State. He just didn't have the weapons. Some of these interceptions have got nothing to do with the players he's playing with. It's just bad football,
right?
Bad decision making. So I worry a little bit for him that it sounds a little bit like Miami might be all in on him.
I
worry a little bit for that, but I'm not a huge Jordan Love fan, but I can see why some teams would convince themselves otherwise.
Yeah. Again, I'm glad we don't have to worry about that. So let's talk about running backs. I think you and I are on the same page. We both love Jonathan Taylor. And it's interesting. You've kind of described, again, you're really good at these, figuring out what the Seahawks like. So they have a certain type of running back. They're players that are usually 5'11" in height, around 220 in pounds, and they're explosive, testing in the 35-inch vertical or more, and 10 foot, what is that, the broad jump? Is that
the broad jump.
The broad jump.
Yeah.
So the two players you've kind of nailed down that fit in those categories are Jonathan Taylor, who I love, and then Cam Akers, who might be available maybe the third round, right?
Yeah, so I'd say so, and I think that Cam Akers is essentially, diet Jonathan Taylor, if you know what I mean by that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the Diet Coke version of that.
Yeah.
So Jonathan Taylor's your full fat version, Jonathan Taylor is pretty much, I think, about as close to an ideal Seahawks running back as you can get. I say that with the caveat that he's not as physical as Marshawn Lynch. And if there's one thing that Pete Carroll really loves, is that physical, beat you down running back. I mean, look at the way that Big Chris in the moment, Chris Carson, he physically punishes defenders. Marshawn did that. Thomas Rawls did that. And they love that kind of guy. That's not really Jonathan Taylor, but what Jonathan Taylor is he's got the ability to accelerate. If you give him any daylight at all, he will accelerate. I mean, he's a 4.3 speed guy. I mean, this is just incredible. I mean, he's as fast as as DK Metcalf, really, and he's as fast as more than the cornerbacks. Most of the cornerbacks in this draft, and to be 4.39 and say he gets a crease and he's gone. He's not a 20-yard. He's not, if you give him an opening, he makes 20 yards. If you get an opening, it's a touchdown for 60 yards. He has more yards after contact. It takes a lot to bring him down. He is a load to bring down. He will run through you. He can run around you. He doesn't have the really vicious jump cut that someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire has or Saquon Barkley. But what he does have is Saquon's speed and his size. And I just think he's a tremendous player. And there's a large number of Seahawks fans these days who like to make fun of the Seahawks for their desire to run the ball and their interest in running backs early in the draft and stuff like that. But if you want to come away from this draft with a legitimate top 20 talent, then Jonathan Taylor can be it. I mean, if he's there at 27 or after a small trade now, you're going to get one of the best players in the draft. Cam Akers, he's probably, I'd say, a little bit more physical, but he's not quite as explosive and as fast as obviously Jonathan Taylor is. Yeah. But they're two really good options, and the Seahawks have to draft a running back at some stage in this draft.
I think so too. Yeah, no, Taylor, I mean, if you go on YouTube and look and type in his highlights, I mean, I don't know how you don't just fall in love with that guy. And he wants to play for the Seahawks because he went to Wisconsin where Russell Wilson went. And so Russell Wilson's like a legend. So he would love to play for us with Wilson. So I think it would be amazing if they took him.
Have you seen the video that I posted the other day?
Yes, I did. I just retweeted that. About him saying that he wanted to play with Wilson. I think he said it twice now, once at the Combine and then in another interview recently. So yeah, that'd be exciting.
So I mean, it was unprompted. It was like he was being asked about the Patriots, and he would bring the conversation back to Pete Carroll. He really, I think he really wants to play for the Seahawks, and I kind of like that. It's kind of a fan thing. Sure. You want your guys to want to play for your team. But I like that. I kind of want. I want to see guys in Seattle who want to be here.
Exactly.
I kind of want. Sometimes it's disappointing. The great phone calls where they ring the guys up and go, "Hey, you're a Seahawk," and like a lot of, I have to say, over the last 2 or 3 years, it's been the phone rings and the guy picks up and goes, "Hello, hi, it's John Schneider from the Seahawks," and they're like, huh? And they're like, "We're going to draft you here." Yeah,
right.
And they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, could you be a little more excited? Yeah. Jeez.
And it's like, yeah, I'm excited, yeah. And it's like, come on, man. If it was me, I'd be like, it wouldn't matter if the Bengals had drafted me. I'd be like, yes.
I know, right? Seriously. Well, if the Seahawks don't take Taylor, I'm at least taking him in my fantasy league because I think he's a stud. So.
Good choice. I think he's a quality player.
Let's move on to wide receivers. I think there's a lot of exciting wide receivers in this class. You have a list. Because again, you've kind of narrowed down this formula. They like fast wide receivers. So some of the top names, Henry Ruggs, I think he's going to be gone. but Quez Watkins, Denzel Mims, Darnell Mooney, Devin Duvernay, Antonio Gibson, my favorite, and then Chase Claypool, who's also kind of a tight end. Some of those top names. Do you think that's somebody that they might take then in one of these later rounds?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing for the Seahawks here is it's all about, and it's the same with the pass rush, and it's the same with the running back, and it's the same with the offensive line. They have got to work out in this draft because they've got a few things they need to get done here. They've got a few positions they need to tick off along the way. And it's working out the puzzle of where do you draft a certain position in a certain range. With the receivers, it's deep throughout. So you could take one with your first pick, but you could also get a really good guy probably in the third or the fourth round. So you've got to bear that in mind a little bit here.
Right.
It's a top-heavy running back class. Like, as soon as the first 5 guys are gone, then you're not going to get a really good one. You might get a decent one who can come in and be like Mike Davis was a couple of years ago, but you're not going to get somebody who you really believe in who can be the future of the position. So you've got to weigh that up. You've got to weigh up the fact that the offensive tackles are going to come off the board quite quickly, so you might need to go with that position first if you want to take an offensive tackle with your first pick. And then with the pass rushers, you've kind of got to say, okay, it's the biggest need on the team, but where's the best place to take it? Because I don't think the right thing to do is to take a pass rusher first, even if you trade down. I think the value of defensive line, defensive tackle or defensive end, is going to come in the late second and early third when the Seahawks have 2 picks. So it's about working out the range you want to go. And from the receiver position, I think you probably don't take one first up as appealing as maybe like a Jalen Reagor or a Denzel Mims or Brandon Ayuk. And I think Chase Claypool is going to go very, very early. Is it one of those guys, or do you wait to the end of the second or the third or the fourth and say Brian Edwards is really, really good? He set all the records at South Carolina. Devin Duvernay at Texas is kind of like a little Golden Tate. You've got Lynn Bowden and people like that, and you go down Joe Reed, who could be a kick returner for you as well. Desmond Patman. There are other guys in there who are really, really kind of fit what they look for, and maybe you can wait a little bit, especially time Philip Dorsett.
Did you say Desmond Patman?
Yeah,
that's another. Yeah, he had a really good workout. Another Washington State guy. Do you think he'll be drafted, or would he be an undrafted guy?
No, I think he's in there.
Okay,
I think because of the speed, he could sneak. Because of the speed, he could sneak in there.
Yeah, so that's exciting to see that. Tight ends, there's not a lot. It's not a very deep draft for tight ends. I think we both are on the same page with Hunter Bryant. I think Cole Kmet, who a lot of have as the number 1 tight end, I think he might be a little bit overrated. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the thing to look for with tight ends, and it's not just the Seahawks thing, if you actually go and look at the top tight ends in the league and the guys who have been in the league recently, and Gronk's coming back now, and he's one of these. They all do well in the short shot, the 3-cone and the short shot.
Yeah.
So the 3-cone is kind of in the 7.10 range. Mm-hmm. All of the top tight ends, your Kelsey, your Gronk.
Yeah, you had 4 names that fit this category. It's Adam Troutman, Charlie Tuma, whatever his name is, Dalton Keene, and Hunter Bryant. So it's probably going to be one of those 4 if the Seahawks take a tight end, right?
Yeah, they seem like the guys that are most likely. I think the other name that I would bring up, and the thing about Cole Kmet, just come out to him briefly, is he did not test well in the 3-cone. The other name that I would sort of throw in there is Devin Asiasi from UCLA, who didn't do any of the testing. So we don't know how good he is because he didn't do the testing at the college. But he's a really fluid, natural tight end. He just effortlessly runs the seam. He's got wonderful soft hands, big mitts that just absorb the football. And he seems to be somebody who's rising a little bit. I think I had him listed in round 4.
Okay.
I think that's the kind of range that he could sneak into round 3. And I think he's a name to add to the list as well, even though we don't know the testing.
We don't know. We could guess. We could estimate. And then what about offensive linemen? Is this the case that they finally take some offensive linemen high? It just seems like every year we think, okay, they're going to get Russell some protection, and then they skip it for, until, day 3 a lot of times. So is this the year the Seahawks finally take some offensive linemen?
Possibly so. I mean, the problem the Seahawks have got is that because they pick at the end of round one. Now the league has got it's a league-wide problem. Nobody has very good offensive lines.
Yeah.
I know it kind of feels like, especially that's an issue in the Seattle, but it's an issue pretty much everywhere. Certain teams have done better than others. The Colts, for example, but then they spent a top 6 pick on a guard. So, you'd expect them to, expect them to have a good offensive line when they have the luxury of doing that. With the Seahawks picking on average 29th overall, most of the good offensive linemen are gone.
Yeah.
You're going to see 4 or 5 go in the top 15 in the draft because teams just snap these guys up. And that could easily be the case again. If you get to the end of round one and we're talking about guys like Austin Jackson and Ezra Cleveland and Isaiah Wilson and Josh Jones, if those guys are not there, then they're not going to be able to take one early. Cesar Ruiz is a guy that I really, really like. Interviewed him a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if he's going to be there. I don't think he will be there at 27. So if these guys are gone, then it makes it very hard to do. And the other quick point that I would make on this is that the Seahawks have actually drafted quite a lot of young offensive linemen over the years. When you think about it, Russell Okung, James Carter, John Moffitt, Justin Britt, Jermaine Ifedi.
Boo, we don't like him. So many holding penalties for Ifedi.
All of these guys that they drafted early,
right?
And very few of them have amounted to really very much.
Yeah.
And I think they've. And look, people will say, "Well, is it a Tom Cable thing? Is it Mike Solari? Is it the Seahawks?" It's just a review of how difficult it is to find offensive linemen. If you actually go through the list of offensive linemen that have been taken, I did a piece on this. It was last year or the year before, and I wrote down every single offensive lineman that had been drafted after the Seahawks first pick in the draft, and I think there was something like 4 Pro Bowlers in 8 drafts or something like that.
Wow!
So you're trying to fight that, and to expect the Seahawks to have found one of the 4 is you would hope that they would. But it's very difficult to be that one of there's the 28 teams who did not pick one of those 4, and of the 4, I think one of them was Trai Turner, who's just been traded by the Panthers. So even the teams that are hitting on these guys, Trai Turner, who's just gone to the Chargers, they're trading them away. So it's very, very difficult to find options in the draft, and it's one of if people are wondering why the Seahawks have just signed 18 different offensive linemen in free agency, it's because what they've decided is they're just going to load up on veterans and younger guys who are already in their program, and they're going to say, off you go, have a fight it out, and we'll pick the 5 best guys.
It's kind of like my girlfriend she works at the Channel 12 here, and they hire a bunch of salesmen and throw a bunch against the wall and see who sticks. So I think it's probably the same with offensive linemen for the Seahawks. They're just going to have a bunch of guys in there and see who can beat it out, right? Now, one name I do want to mention for offensive linemen is a guy you interviewed, Prince. I never say his last name. The guy from Auburn.
Prince Tagovailoa.
Yeah, what do you think? Now, what round could you get him in?
I think probably the 2nd round.
Okay.
He's very athletic. I mean, he didn't have a chance to show that because he was injured. He got flagged at the Senior Bowl, and then wasn't able to perform there, and then wasn't healthy in time for the combine. He's very athletic, very tough, very physical. He's not the longest guy, and he's got 33-inch arms, but he's still enough. Joe Thomas had 33-inch arms, and Ezra Cleveland's got 33-inch arms. It's not a problem really.
Do you think he's got that grit? Do you think he's got that determination, that it factor?
I think so. I mean, I think that he doesn't have the backstory of Robert Hunt, who I should have mentioned in the.
Right.
I think Robert Hunt's going to go a lot. I think Robert Hunt's going to go a lot earlier than people think. I think Robert Hunt could go in the top 45. And I did a 7-round mock draft on Sunday, I think it was. And had the Seahawks trading into down into round 2 as they often do, and then taking Robert Hunt with the first pick because I just have a feeling that he's going to go a lot earlier than people realise. He for me is the grit factor. Prince, he's gone through a lot. It's great, great story coming over from Nigeria and doing all of that. He's physical. He is tough on the football field, but there's not necessarily the wow factor there.
Yeah. What about defensive tackles? I've watched some of the defensive tackle tape. Not a lot of these prospects really jump out at me. Is there anybody that you're really excited about for the Seahawks to possibly draft for defensive tackle?
Devon Hamilton at Ohio State is the name that I would throw out there. He's people just pigeonhole him as a nose tackle because he's 6'4" and 320 pounds. But what he actually has, he has 33-inch arms, so he can keep his frame clean. He scaps really, really well. He can anchor the line, but he can shoot a gap and get into the backfield. He had 10.5 tackles for a loss last season and 6 sacks, which for any defensive tackle is a great tally. For a guy who's 320 pounds, it is really, really good. I can't believe he's flown under the radar as much as he has, especially because he was at Ohio State. At the Senior Bowl, he won 73% of his 1v1s, according to Pro Football Focus.
Okay.
That was the second highest win percentage of any of the pass rushers, and the guy who was ahead of him was Zach Bourne from Wisconsin, who was 238 pounds. Now, if you put a 238-pound speed rusher against a 300-pound offensive lineman in space and say, can the 238-pound guy run around him? The answer will be yes. So kind of Zach Bourne performing well in that test is to be expected. For Devon Hamilton at 320 pounds, to be 2% off being the best defensive lineman in terms of those 1v1s is special. And then the other thing you've got to remember is that you see these people talking up Ross Blacklock and Jordan Elliott, Neville Gallimore, and I don't get it. Well, Ross Blacklock had the same win percentage, which was 12.6% in college football last season, as Devon Hamilton. Except Devon Hamilton weighs 30 pounds more. So if you want someone who can anchor your line, and if you want someone who can anchor your line, play the run, but then also provide some pass rush, I think Devon Hamilton's the guy to target.
Okay, so that's another one. And one for defensive ends, because I think besides QB and offensive tackle, I think pass rushing edge is one of the most valuable positions for a team. And it seems like it's hard to find those mid-level prospects for this position, like same with offensive tackle and quarterback. You almost have to use a high pick to get that talent. So obviously Chase Young, he's good. He'll be gone. But who's the best after him? You mentioned a few names on your site: Josh Uche, Julian Okwara, Jabari Zuniga, Daryl Taylor, and Trevis Gibson. You think one of those 5 could be somebody the Seahawks take?
Yeah, I think that Josh Uche is probably the most natural edge rusher of all of the guys, apart from Chase Young. And that holds up in pressure percentage and pass rush win percentage. They both have very similar scores there. His ability to bend and straighten off the edge, get around the tackle, straighten the quarterback, is as good as anybody in this class. The only problem is that he's slightly undersized. Didn't have you kind of wonder sometimes why it took him so long to get going at Michigan and find his role there. But he's a player the Seahawks could easily trade back into the top of round 2 and take him. Julian Okwara is stronger than he looks. He's quick. He looks like a Leo. His pass rush win percentage is good. Jabari Zuniga played a little bit more inside, but he's got like a Greek god frame. Yeah, and was very good test with it. Very explosive, very fast. Yeah, very fast.
What do you think he'd be in round 2, maybe bottom round 2?
Round 2, I think. I mean, okay. I think you could go top 45 just because of the testing, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was there like 59 for the Seahawks if they wanted him.
Wow.
And then you mentioned Daryl Taylor. The thing about Daryl Taylor is he could be amazing. He could be the best pass rusher in this whole draft.
Wow.
He's like 267 pounds, 6'4", 33-inch arms. If you took his 10 best plays from 2019 and put them in a highlight video, you'd think you were watching Chase Young. The problem is when you actually watch the tape, it's a lot more underwhelming. He's not consistent. He has a flash here and there, but he doesn't really know what to do with his frame and his athletic potential. He's kind of all over the place. And he has his wins because of his athleticism, but he needs to refine his technique.
Interesting.
But if you bring him in and add him to the rotation as let's say a 3rd round pick, you could be looking at another Frank Clark in a couple of years' time. He's got that level of potential to develop into someone like Frank. So someone's going to take a chance on him. He's got an injury background, which could put teams off, especially in this draft. But he is somebody to keep an eye on for sure. Okay. I would say in round 3.
I like being able to get somebody like that in the mid rounds. That's always nice. And Gibson, do you think he's also a mid round guy or late round?
Yeah, he's a Seahawks fan, so it'd be nice to draft him. Chase Claypool is a Seahawks fan as well, actually. He grew up in Abbotsford.
That's good to know.
And then, so yeah, I think that he's another option. I think that there's a lot of overrated defensive linemen in this draft as well. You often hear, Gross Matos is, I don't think he's as good as everybody's saying. AJ Epinesa, not as good as everybody's saying. Caleb on Chasen, Blacklock, Elliott Gilmore, who I mentioned earlier. I think there's a lot of red herrings out there.
Okay.
There are some guys and the names we've talked about, real potential to come in and help the team.
Yeah. Well, we also need maybe some linebackers. I know you're a big fan of Willie Gay, linebacker from Mississippi. You said he's very similar to Bobby Wagner, and he could actually play any linebacker position. But some other names you mentioned were Kenneth Murray, Patrick Queen, Logan Wilson, Malik Harrison, and Davion Taylor. You want to talk about those guys?
Yeah. So Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen, they're going to go in the first round, so
sure,
they're probably not likely.
They'll probably be gone.
But, the one, Logan Wilson is amazing. Like he has a whole bag of interceptions over the last few years. He was a 3-year captain at wing. He ran a 4.6. So really fast for a big linebacker. Does not get blocked at the perimeter, which the Seahawks badly need some of that. He will shed blocks. He can sift through traffic. He's like a heat-seeking missile to the ball carrier. He's a quiet, measured leader. Who leads by example. Family guy. He's like some people will say like a perfect player really, and I could see him going a lot earlier than round 2 for him. Is probably very, very likely. Willie Gay is also, you mentioned that, fantastic in coverage, identical to Bobby Wagner. Malik Harrison's probably more of that 3-4 middle linebacker type. You put him next to another guy in the middle, you have him play the run well, stuff like that, north-south type linebacker. I don't think he's a sideline-to-sideline guy, but he tested very well in the free throw. He's kind of got a similar frame to KJ Wright, and if they wanted to, get the next KJ, he's very tough. He likes a big hit, so he's somebody who could be that. Davion Taylor's just lightning quick, gets around the field, and they need some speed on that front seven. So I don't know if they're going to draft a linebacker, having taken 2 a year ago. But there are definitely some options there.
Yeah, definitely some options. And then also cornerbacks, it seems like less of a need now that they got Dunbar from the Redskins. But I really like C.J. Henderson, but for a top pick. And then the mid to late round guys, I like Kendall Vidor and Reggie Robinson. But you didn't have those guys on your list. Did they not have I know there's certain arm length that the Seahawks like. Did they not have that arm length?
Vidor does, but he's 5'10", and the Seahawks have a strict 5'11" or taller policy, and actually their scouts have referenced that. I think if you watch the Russell Wilson, it's like a video on YouTube from ESPN called "Finding Russell Wilson" or something, and that somebody says, "You want to draft a quarterback at 5'10"? We're not even allowed to draft a cornerback at 5. So that's why I've left him off. Robinson has got the arm length. For me, this is a really limited cornerback. I think that's why they went and got Dunbar. I think people just assume they went and got Dunbar because PFF said he's the second best cornerback in the league. I think they went and got Dunbar because they looked at this draft and said, we'd like to spend a 5th round pick on a cornerback, but that guy is not there in this draft.
Yeah.
There just aren't the 32 inch. But what I will say is that they need a nickel, and there are some nickel prospects in this draft that I would expect them to go after and seriously consider. Amik Robertson, who I spoke to last week, is certainly somewhere near the top of that list, I would say, as somebody that they can really go after. And there are one or two, Terrell Burgess at Utah. You've got the guy at Penn State, and there's one or two others who could really be attractive options to them.
Isn't Burgess more of a safety, though? Are they going to use him at corner, you're thinking?
He played safety and corner at Utah, but the belief is that he's going to be a nickel. The belief is he's going to be a nickel at the next level.
Okay, and then and as far as safeties go, I really like, I kind of like the Kenny Robinson kid, who I guess he was actually at West Virginia, but then he was in the XFL. Is that kid somebody that's rising up on the boards? I mean, he didn't get a chance to do a workout probably because he was XFL, but do you think it might be somebody that gets drafted? He was on your list, I think, as possible Seahawks draft picks, right?
Yeah, I put him in round 3. He's very much big hitter, gets flagged, but sometimes that's okay. Rangy, turns the ball over. Interesting route through to the NFL. Going to the XFL. I could certainly see him going in in the third round range. And then there's like a few other guys as well that,
Antoine Winfield, he had a really good combine. Yeah,
he's amazing.
Yeah.
If he doesn't go in the first round, then I'll be disappointed for him because he has got everything. Mature, high character, bloodlines from his dad, of course. Great college career, mass production at Minnesota. He's going to be a leader for you. He can fly around the field. Amazing combine. He could be Earl Thomas if you wanted to be. He's
tempting.
really, really, he's really, really good. Really, really good player. And there was a while back there was something about an injury thing, and maybe he might last a little bit longer than he otherwise would. But I think the floor for him is top 50.
Okay. Wow. That's still a lot of good choices there. Jeremy Chin, Grant Delpit, Kyle Duggar, some of those guys could be a good fit for the Seahawks. It just depends on, we have so many other needs though. I don't know that safety is necessarily a top need right now, right?
Yeah, you've got to prioritize other positions, I think, because you've drafted a player at safety in round 2 within a year. You've traded for Quandre Diggs. You've still got Bradley McDougall. You've still got Lado Hill. So it's a position they might look at later on, but ultimately they've got to, they've got to draft an offensive lineman at least. They've got to draft a running back. They've got to draft a receiver. They've got to draft a pass rusher. They've got to draft a defensive tackle, and you can only have so many picks.
Right. What about? I think that's every position we talked about. What except special teams? Do you think there's any kickers or punters or long snappers you want to mention now?
No, I mean the only sort of special team. I think it's the receivers who can become kick returners.
Oh, like Antonio Gibson? Did we mention him before? I really like that kid.
A lot of people like him, and he could do that. And Joe Reed at Virginia was like all ACC in kick returning, and there's a whole bunch of these guys. Devin Duvernay could do it. Laviska Shenault could do it. Brian Edwards could do it. Ayuk, Hamler, Rieger, CeeDee Lamb. These are all guys who could be return guys. Henry Ruggs. So there's a lot of options there for the Seahawks to go and get a receiver who can do that role as well.
So what is your ideal, like realistic situation for the Seahawks in the draft this year? Like what would you do?
That's harder to answer than it has been in previous years. Like in other drafts, it's been easy to say they need an offensive tackle or they need to go and get a receiver, or like a couple of years ago, I spent the whole draft season talking about running backs because
I lost you there for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's all right. You were saying about the Seahawks, what you want them to do?
Yeah, so they could go and get an offensive tackle, and that's either to play right tackle and compete with Shell, and that could be an Isaiah Wilson, or it could be a Robert Hunt, or they could go and get a left tackle to go and potentially replace Dwayne Brown down the line or something like that. And that could be Ezra Cleveland or an Austin Jackson or a Josh Jones. It could be that they go and get Jonathan Taylor and just get a really good player to play running back, or a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Receivers going to be a need there, or trade down and get a pass rusher. I think that what the perfect situation for me for the Seahawks is to come out of this having bolstered your defensive line. But there are many different ways they can do that. And to have ticked off all those needs, to come out of the draft with a running back that you really like, to come out of the draft with a receiver that you really like, to come out of the draft with an offensive lineman. And if it's not someone early, it's someone like a Sadiq Charles, maybe at LSU, who's going to be available a lot later on, but has played left tackle and has got that potential to play left tackle in the NFL as well, that you can train behind Dwayne Brown. So it's to come out with, I want the Seahawks to come out of this draft like you feel like they've got some really good young talent. When they came out of the draft last year, and DK Metcalf has, had amazing potential. You could look at him and you say, look, he's run a 4.33 and he's 230 pounds and he looks amazing and he's got so much upside, and he went and delivered a great rookie season. And the kind of what I want to see from the players they draft this year is that same excitement, is the belief that they could actually become great players, not just fill holes or fill, like we want this, he's our type of guy. I want to see them draft players who you really think he's got a shot to be great.
That's why I love Taylor as a pick, because I just think he's so exciting. There's not a lot to get excited about LJ Collier. Do you think he'll get better this year maybe?
Maybe I hope so. He needs to be. I think he has to prove that he's. I mean, he could be gone within a year, so
Right.
he has to prove that he belongs. And he's not just Lawrence. I mean, he's not even Lawrence Jackson at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like a Ken Balmer at the moment, and yeah, he better be ready.
So
you know,
what do
it's
you?
going to be tough for him.
Yeah. So now you've said kind of what you want the Seahawks to do, but what do you think they're actually going to do? Because it seems like they never do what I want them to do. They never take the guys that I like or that I want. So do you think they'll take some lineman that maybe isn't even on your list? Did you have Collier on your list last year? I don't remember him being on there.
Yeah.
You did? Okay.
So, I mean, I reread it last night. Actually, I was just sort of reminding myself what I did. I didn't want to leave anything out that I'd done the year before. So I kind of reviewed it, and he was on the list. You know, I said that he could be a target because he looks like Michael Bennett, and that's you know. But he was on a long list, you know, of players. It wasn't like I just singled him out.
Sure.
He was on a list of 5 or 6 defensive linemen that they could target with their first pick. And you know, we talked about Marquise Blair and amongst the players who might fall, I had to pick off and said, you know, because he got a neck injury and there's the 3-cone and stuff like that. And you know, we thought that he may be too tempting to pass up if he was there, you know, at a certain range, you know, in round 2 or something like that. So we did hit on a couple of those, and Marquise Blair as well. We talked an awful lot about him throughout the season because of his hitting and his speed. So I'm not expecting them to necessarily draft someone I'm not considering. It's just a case of who and what, you know, to answer the question of what I think they will do. I think I don't want to sound like a stuck record. It could be one. You know, I think we've kind of gone through the players that they could go for.
Yeah.
But it depends on, like, let me just give you a scenario, for example. I think they probably will really like Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
But if Tampa Bay trades down from 14 to, let's say, 21, let's say the Eagles want to move up and get Henry Ruggs before Denver. If then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trade down to 21 and they take Jonathan Taylor, you can't do anything about that.
Right.
Like, he'll be gone. He'll be gone and he'll be off the board and you move on. So then what do you do then? Then do you trade down and look at Josh Uche or Robert Hunt or one of the tackles? Do you trade down a couple of spots and try and get an Ezra Cleveland or an Austin Jackson? You know, there's all sorts. Like, you could see, let's say they wanted to get a really good left tackle who could replace Dwayne Brown. But if the Cleveland Browns trade down and take Ezra Cleveland, and then let's say Minnesota take Austin Jackson, then what are you going to do? You can't go that route. So they're going to be dictated to by what happens in front of them.
Yeah, and they don't trade up very often, do they? They haven't done that in a long time, if ever. I don't think Schneider's ever done that. Has he in round 1?
And the reason is quite simple. Why they don't do it in round 1 is because to move up, you know, rounds 3, which they've done a few times, Cody Barton, Tyler Lockett, and then to move up in round 2, DK Metcalf, Jaron Reed, it costs you a 4th round pick, and that's a late 4th round pick, and that's out of the general meat of the draft in any given year. So it doesn't matter what the draft class is. Usually, when you're talking about late 4th round picks, you're not talking about players that you have to have. By that point in the draft, you are looking for ideals and potential and guys that you would like to develop. In the first 3 rounds, you're looking for your guys. You're looking for your guys that you've got a ring around that you want to come out of the draft with. And if you move up in round 1, at the very minimum it's going to cost you is a 3rd round pick. And John Schneider does not want to give away a premium 3rd round pick to go and get one specific player. He wants to have as many of those 3rd round picks as possible. And he definitely doesn't want to lose the one that he's got this year just to move up a few spots to get a specific player when he will have about 20 players of the same value when the Seahawks are on the board at 27. And that's the way. If you look at the horizontal board, there's like 18 first round grades that I put down.
Yes, you did. You have a great job. If you go to your website, yeah, absolutely.
So when you look, what that means is that really the first round is picks 1 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
The second round starts at pick 19 because that's where the talent starts coming
the value,
off the board.
Yeah, the value is the same.
And
so you're saying it's better for them to change
40 guys.
Yeah, it's better for them to trade down. There's a lot because the value in round 2 is going to be comparable from the beginning to the end of round 2, right?
Yeah.
So
the value between like pick 19 and pick 60 is going to be very similar.
But unless, one of those guys that you mentioned, it's picks 1 through 18, falls to us at 27, we might just want to take whoever that is right away, right?
possibly so. I think there are players in this draft where they could feel that way,
Yeah.
and it also depends. Like it's little things like you and I might like a player. Let's say so. I like Jonathan Taylor. You like Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
We like the
him.
idea of the Seahawks. So we like the idea of the Seahawks drafting Jonathan Taylor. What if the team have the same grade on Jonathan Taylor that they have on Clyde Edwards-Helaire? So they've got this exact same grade. Let's just imagine a scenario where they both have the same grade, and they're on the clock at 27. And let's say that they know that Baltimore's not going to take a running back, and Tennessee's not going to take a running back, so they can trade 2 spots and feel confident that they may both be there. But if one goes off the board, they can still get the other one, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
That's how they judge these things, and they've done that before. So they traded down. 2012, they traded down knowing they could get, funnily enough, Bobby Wagner or Michael Kendricks.
And then they ended up getting both of them later.
And they ended up both.
Yeah.
In 2013, they traded down because Eddie Lacy and Kristen Michael were on the board. And then Eddie Lacy came off, and then the next pick I think was Kristen Michael after that. So they have bunches of players who are similarly graded, and they trade down. A couple of years ago, Rasheem Green. So there was Sam Hubbard and Rasheem Green. They traded down a few spots. Sam Hubbard came off the board. They took Rasheem Green. So they have the players of a similar grade, and then you move down knowing that you can get at least one. So that's the kind of position you're in. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 players who are graded the same way when you're on the board, and you trade down a few spots, you do that because you feel confident you're going to get at least one of the guys that you really, really want.
Oh, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, I hope they make the right decision. I hope we get some marquee players this year. I do like to wrap up each episode with a charity. Do you have a nonprofit or a cause that you work with right now?
You know what? I filmed a piece a few days ago at a charity, and this people will not know of this charity other than those who live near me in England. But it was the Ashgate Hospice, and they were looking after some people in there. It's a hospice for people who are very seriously ill, but they've actually just turned one of their wards into a coronavirus ward, and they are accepting patients there because obviously there's a lot of sick people at the moment, and the hospitals are under a lot of pressure. So, if people want to, they told me they were going to be £500,000 down because of they're not getting donations and they're not able to fundraise in the way they usually would. So. I thought I'd give them a shout out.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rob. Well, we enjoy your work on the Seahawks Draft blog. I think you do an amazing job there, and I look forward to your analysis of the picks this year after it's all said and done. Thank you so much for doing my podcast. What does the future hold for you? Would your dream job be an NFL draft analyst for ESPN or NFL Network?
Yeah, I love that. I don't think that there'll be a huge demand for a chap with a British accent.
I love it. It's great.
I think it would be a perfect compliment to Mel's Kiper's crazy hair.
Yeah.
I just love the fact that people care what a bloke from England thinks about all of this stuff, and I thoroughly enjoy doing it. I love doing podcasts like this because I don't know many Seahawks fans where I live. There are a lot of people who I spot, wearing Seahawks hats and jerseys and stuff like that these days in England. But they're a very popular team in England. But I don't have much opportunity to discuss the team. So any invite to a podcast is always well received. So,
you can call me anytime if you want to just talk. I'd love to talk Seahawks. I could talk Seahawks every day for an hour. We could do this every at least once a week. So, and if I'm ever in England, I'm going to have to look you up and have a beer with you or something.
Definitely, yeah. I'm always up for a beer.
Okay, well, thanks, man. I appreciate it so much. You have a good day. Or good night, I guess it should be for you, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Cheers.
Bad, man. But thanks for your time, man. Thank you.
No problem. Go Hawks. Well, there you have it. Rob Staton from Seahawks Draft blog website, and he's also a BBC Yorkshire sports journalist. Knows his stuff. I can't imagine anyone else knowing more about the Seahawks and the draft and predicting what they're going to do. He knows everything. He's breaking out on these formulas. I mean, you heard him. He's amazing. So if you made it through this episode, congratulations. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow Rob on social media. He's on Twitter. You can check out his Seahawks draft website. I think I don't think he has a Facebook. I know he's on Twitter though, big on Twitter. He's got like thousands and thousands of followers. I am on all the social medias. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything. So if you like, Rob is also on YouTube, and I'm on YouTube as well. Rob has some interviews on YouTube, and that's where you can hear some of the interviews he mentioned in this episode. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the actual draft. If you're listening to this after the draft, then you can, years later, you can say, oh, Rob didn't know anything. But, it's harder to do that before the draft. So this is recorded the day before the NFL Draft 2020. So, again, if you enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more episodes. Until next time,